Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at this idea of failing forward.
Oh, yeah. This is a good one.
Yeah, it's something that, I think everyone has experience with, but we don't always like to talk about.
Right. Failure is kind of a taboo subject.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, like, if you look at anyone who's achieved any kind of success, they've probably failed a bunch of times along the way.
Yeah, for sure. And, we've got some really interesting sources for this deep dive. Some real life stories, some psychological insights into, like, not just what to do about failure, but like why those approaches work.
Yeah, I'm really curious to dig into that because I think, it's one thing to say, oh, yeah, you got to fail to succeed. But like, how do you actually do that? How do you actually like take those failures and use them to your advantage?
Yeah, well, the sources we've got really challenge that typical reaction to failure.
Yeah.
They kind of like, oh no, this is a disaster. Instead, they're encouraging us to think of failure more as feedback.
Okay, so feedback, that's an interesting way to put it. But how do we actually shift our perspective? Because it's so easy to just get bogged down in those negative emotions when things don't go our way.
Well, one of our sources uses a great example, Thomas Edison and his quest to invent the light bulb.
Oh, yeah. Classic example.
Right. Everyone knows the story, but like what's often overlooked is the sheer number of attempts he made before getting it right. We're talking thousands of experiments that didn't work.
Thousands. Wow.
Yeah, but he didn't see them as failures. He saw them as data points, each one eliminating a path that didn't lead to the solution.
So it's like he was systematically ruling out possibilities until he found the one that worked.
Exactly. And the source points out that, if you're not experiencing some degree of failure, you might not be pushing yourself far enough outside your comfort zone.
That's a good point. I mean, it makes you wonder if sometimes we're just too afraid of failing to actually take the risks necessary for real growth.
Yeah, it's all about finding that balance, right? Being bold enough to experiment, knowing that setbacks are going to happen, but also being strategic about learning from those setbacks.
Okay, I'm already feeling a little less intimidated by this whole failing forward thing, but how about we get into some specific examples? How does this actually play out in the lives of people who have, achieved extraordinary things?
Well, you know that they say success leaves clues. And when you look at the journeys of really successful people, you start to notice a pattern. They've almost all faced major setbacks along the way.
Yeah, like those overnight success stories that actually took years of hard work and perseverance.
Exactly. It's easy to just see the highlight reel.
Yeah.
But the reality is most success stories are built on resilience, adaptability, a willingness to embrace failure as part of the journey.
Okay, so let's dive into a specific example. Our sources talk about a few really compelling figures. J.K. Rowling, Walt Disney, Oprah Winfrey. What if we unpack J.K. Rowling's story a bit further?
Yeah, that's a great one. She faced numerous rejections from publishers before finding one who believed in her vision for Harry Potter.
It's crazy to think about that now. Like, can you imagine the frustration and self-doubt she must have gone through?
I mean, 12 rejections, that's a lot of no's to overcome.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what kept her going through all of that. Was it just pure stubbornness, or was there something deeper at play?
Well, our sources point to a few key psychological traits that likely contributed to her ability to fail forward so effectively.
So it wasn't just luck or talent. It was about having the right mindset to navigate those challenges.
Exactly. It's about understanding the psychology of overcoming setbacks. And our sources highlight three key concepts: growth mindset, resilience, and grit, and self-compassion.
Okay, those are some big concepts. Let's break them down one by one, starting with growth mindset. What exactly does that mean, and how does it help us deal with failure?
Well, the term growth mindset, it was coined by psychologist Carol Dweck, and it basically describes the belief that our abilities are not fixed. They can be developed through, dedication, effort, learning from our experiences.
So instead of thinking, I'm just not good at this, someone with a growth mindset would be like, I'm not good at this yet, but I can get better.
Yeah, exactly. It's that yet that makes all the difference. And when it comes to dealing with failure, a growth mindset can be super empowering because instead of seeing a setback as like a sign of personal inadequacy, it becomes an opportunity for learning and growth.
Right. It's like if you believe that you can improve, then a failure isn't the end of the world.
Yeah.
It's just a sign that you need to maybe adjust your approach or try a different strategy.
Exactly. It's about seeing those setbacks as valuable feedback that can help you, refine your skills, get closer to your goals.
Okay, so that's growth mindset. Now, what about resilience and grit? Those sound like pretty tough qualities to cultivate. Is it something you're either born with or not?
Well, while some people might naturally be more resilient than others, it's definitely something that can be developed over time. Think of it like a muscle that gets stronger with each challenge you overcome. And grit, as psychologist Angela Duckworth describes it, is that passionate perseverance you have for long-term goals.
So someone with grit doesn't just give up when things get tough. They have that inner drive that keeps them going even when faced with obstacles and setbacks.
Exactly. They understand that the path to success is rarely a straight line. There will be detours, roadblocks, moments where you might feel like giving up. But true grit is about having that unwavering commitment to your vision, that deep-seated belief that you'll eventually get there.
I love that analogy of the path to success not being linear. It's so true. I think sometimes we set these unrealistic expectations for ourselves, and then when we hit a snag, it feels like a major derailment.
It's all about reframing our definition of success, isn't it?
Yeah.
Instead of focusing solely on the end goal, what if we started celebrating those small wins along the way? Each hurdle we overcome, each lesson we learn from a setback is a step forward, even if it doesn't feel like it in the moment.
That's such a good point. It's like the journey itself is just as important as the destination. Okay, so we've got growth mindset, we've got grit. What about self-compassion? This one seems a bit counterintuitive when we're talking about failure. Why is being kind to ourselves so important in this context?
It might seem counterintuitive, but self-compassion is actually crucial for navigating the emotional fallout of failure. When we experience a setback, it's natural to feel disappointed, frustrated, maybe even angry with ourselves.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I know I've definitely been guilty of that inner critic going into overdrive after a perceived failure.
But research shows that beating ourselves up only makes it harder to recover and move forward. It's like adding insult to injury.
So instead of focusing on our shortcomings and dwelling on what we could have done differently, we should try to approach ourselves with understanding and kindness.
Exactly. Imagine a good friend coming to you after experiencing a setback. You wouldn't berate them or point out all their flaws. You'd offer support, encouragement, maybe a little perspective.
That's a great point. We're often so much harder on ourselves than we would be on anyone else. So how can we actually practice self-compassion, especially when we're feeling, discouraged or disappointed in ourselves?
It starts with recognizing that everyone makes mistakes. It's part of being human. Instead of judging yourself harshly, try to cultivate a sense of curiosity about your experience. Ask yourself, what can I learn from this? How can I use this experience to grow and become more resilient?
So it's about turning that inner critic into a more supportive and understanding inner coach. Okay. All of this is great in theory, but I'm sure some of our listeners are wondering, okay, how do I actually put this into practice? How do
Yeah.
I go from understanding these concepts to actually using them to fail forward?
That's a great question. And luckily, our sources offer some really concrete strategies that you can start implementing right away. We're moving from the why to the how, which I know is what a lot of people are eager to hear about.
Awesome. Let's dive into those actionable strategies. I'm ready to turn those failures into fuel.
All right, let's do it. The first strategy is to reflect, don't dwell. Now, there's a subtle but important distinction between these two approaches.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the difference and why is it so important?
Dwelling on a failure keeps us stuck in the past, replaying those negative emotions over and over again. It's like watching a bad movie on repeat. It doesn't change the ending. It just makes you feel worse.
Oof, I've definitely been there. So how is reflection different?
Reflection, on the other hand, is about taking a step back and analyzing the situation objectively, like a scientist examining data. It's about asking yourself, what happened? What were the contributing factors? What went well? What could I have done differently?
So instead of getting lost in the woulda, coulda, shouldas, we're taking a more analytical approach to understanding what went wrong and what we can learn from the experience.
Exactly. And this leads us to the next strategy. Adjust and adapt failure often signals that our current approach isn't working. It's a message from the universe saying, hey, time to try something new.
So we need to be flexible and willing to pivot when necessary. It's not about giving up on our goals. It's about finding a more effective way to achieve them.
Think of it like navigating a maze. You might hit a dead end, but that doesn't mean you give up. You simply try a different path, using the information you've gathered to guide your next move.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, this next strategy, take action, immediately seems a bit counterintuitive. Wouldn't it be better to take some time to process the failure before jumping back in?
It's certainly tempting to want to retreat and lick our wounds for a bit, but the longer we wait, the harder it can be to overcome that inertia and get back on track.
So even if it's just a small step, the key is to keep that momentum going.
Exactly. Think of it like starting a car on a cold morning. It takes a bit of effort to get the engine going, but once it's running, it's much easier to keep it going. Taking action, even a small action, can help break that initial resistance and get us moving again.
All right, that's a great analogy. I'm starting to see how all these strategies are interconnected. So what's next on our list?
The fourth strategy is to seek feedback. Sometimes we're so close to a situation that we can't see it clearly. That's where an outside perspective can be invaluable.
So whether it's a trusted mentor, a colleague, or even a friend, getting feedback from someone we respect can help us identify those blind spots and gain valuable insights that we might have missed on our own.
It's like having an extra set of eyes on the problem, someone who can offer a fresh perspective and help us see things from a different angle.
And it loops back to that growth mindset we were talking about earlier, right? Seeking feedback demonstrates that we're open to learning and improvement, even if it means hearing things we might not want to hear.
Absolutely. It's about being willing to step outside of our comfort zone and be vulnerable enough to ask for help when we need it. And finally, we have celebrate progress, which might seem a bit odd when we're talking about failure. Why is it important to celebrate when we haven't necessarily achieved our ultimate goal?
Yeah, that's a good point. It seems counterintuitive.
Well, it might seem counterintuitive, but celebrating progress,
Mm.
even those small wins along the way, is crucial for maintaining motivation and momentum. It's like giving ourselves a pat on the back for all the effort we're putting in, even if we haven't, reached the finish line yet.
Yeah, it's like those milestones they have during a marathon, even though you haven't finished the race. Those markers give you a sense of accomplishment and keep you going.
Exactly. And those small celebrations can serve as fuel,
Yeah.
reminding us that we are capable of making progress even in the face of setbacks.
So out of these 5 strategies, reflect, don't dwell, adjust and adapt, take action, immediately seek feedback, and celebrate progress. Is there one that stands out to you as particularly powerful, or maybe one that people often overlook?
Hmm. That's a great question. I think seek feedback is one that people often shy away from, but it can be incredibly insightful. Sometimes we're just too close to the situation to see it clearly, and an outside perspective can be a game changer.
Yeah, I agree. It can be tough to swallow our pride and ask for help, but the insights we gain can be well worth it, and it shows that we're committed to growth and learning.
Absolutely. And it loops back to that growth mindset we were talking about earlier. Seeking feedback demonstrates that we're open to learning and improvement, even if it means hearing things we might not want to hear. Okay, so before we wrap up this deep dive, let's connect all of this back to you, dear listener. We've covered a lot of ground today, from reframing failure to actionable strategies for moving forward.
Yeah, the key takeaway here is that failure is not the opposite of success. It's a potential part of the journey. It's about learning to fail forward, using setbacks as stepping stones on the path to achieving our goals. And remember, you're not alone in this journey. Everyone experiences failure at some point. It's what we do with those experiences that defines us.
Now, to wrap things up, I'm going to leave you with one final thought-provoking question to ponder. If failure is feedback, what is the system or goal you're working towards? That this feedback is trying to guide you to? What are those setbacks trying to teach you? What adjustments might you need to make to reach your ultimate destination? It's something to really reflect on.
I love that. It's
Yeah.
like those setbacks are little course corrections nudging us in the right direction. So to our listener, remember, this failure is not the end. It's not a full stop. It's more like a comma, a pause before the next chapter unfolds.
And that next chapter can be even more amazing than you ever imagined.
Beautifully said. And with that, we'll wrap up our deep dive into failing forward. We hope you found this exploration insightful and encouraging.
Remember, embrace those setbacks, learn from them, and keep moving forward.
Until next time.